It's still my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Jairam Ramesh, former Union Minister of State for Environment and Cabinet Minister Rural Development, and Mr. Sunil Kanoria, President ASSOCHAM. He's just been elected from Kolkata, and he's the Vice Chairman of SRAE Infrastructure Finance. As you may know, Mr. Ramesh has written a wonderful book called Green Signals, and much of our discussion is going to be around this book. And of course, any other issues that they want to discuss and you want to discuss. So without much ado, the first question to you, sir. For the longest time, it was thought that economic development always came at the cost of environmental consciousness and vice versa. So is this debate over or beginning, in the middle?
Well, the debate has not even started in this country, actually. And I think we have a very long way to go. And for too long, we have, in my view, the last 2 decades at least, we have worshipped the god of GDP growth. And that is going to extract a very heavy environmental cost in the long run. All countries in the world, the United States, Brazil, Europe, China, they've all followed the only model that modern economics teaches, which is grow now, pay later. You have 20 years of fast economic growth, you have pollution, you have deforestation, you have contamination, but that's the price we have to pay for growth. And we'll do whatever we have to do 20 years from now. And India has, embarked on that same path for good reason. However, I think what I've tried to argue in the book is that we must be different. We have to be different because there are certain factors that are unique to India that make us imperative for us to make a departure from the grow now, pay later model. So the debate, to answer your question, the debate is just beginning. And I think the next few years is going to be consumed by this debate. On the one hand, the need for faster economic growth, which nobody can deny. And on the other hand, the protection and preservation of our natural resources, which also nobody can deny.
Mr. Kanoria, would you have a viewpoint which is contrarian to this from the industry, or do you support him? What would you think?
Well, not exactly. The way I see it, basically, India is poised in a great opportunity because it had not grown in the past. The positive aspect of it is that it can grow much better going forward. It can take on the learnings which various developed economies have had, the challenges which the development has had to our environment, and bring those learnings and bring that in our development agenda. If we bring that and along with that, create a program, create the development agenda, it can help a lot. And I think this debate is good, healthy. It's important to basically, the onus, I would say a lot is on the society and the government to lay down programs, policies, open, transparent policies. It will evolve over time. But how much of research we can do, how much of learnings we can do from the world in the various countries and bring those, some of the good practices, look at the local level and then do it, it can be much better to develop.
So he raises an important point of openness and transparency. And if I remember, one of the hallmarks of your tenure was that environment suddenly was mainstream, relatively. It became a part of the national policy discourse. There was more transparency around it, from glass doors to your office, to your speaking orders, to the various parliamentary committees. This was something new that we were seeing, and media documented it as well. So would you like to talk a little bit about that, how do you really make it as part of a national discourse?
Well, before I answer your question, Paroma, let me just very briefly, almost telegraphically, explain why I think this grow now, pay later is not a sustainable proposition for India. I think it's important because there are far too many people in this country still placing the highest emphasis on a blind obsession with faster economic growth. And I myself was part of that constituency for almost 20 years. First and foremost is a demographic reason. We don't realize the world, most countries' population is declining. But in India, we're going to add 400 million people in the next 30 years. We are 1.25 billion today, and whether we like it or not, our demographic karma is that we are going to be 1.7 billion by the year 2045. Now, which country? We're going to add 1/3 of our current population. And therefore, the protection of our natural resources becomes absolutely essential in order to preserve something for future generations. In other countries, you're not going to have future generations because population is declining. Secondly, we have a huge vulnerability to climate change. I hope we get to talk about it. Our monsoons are uncertain. Our glacier melt is now almost a predictable fact. Mean sea levels are increasing. Sundarbans is going to be the first primary casualty out of this. Deforestation has taken place on a massive scale and is going to increase because most of our coal and natural resources are in our forest areas. And therefore, for these reasons, India must relook at a model of economic growth that places a blind emphasis on the GDP growth as the sole objective of economic planning. And I think, as the President of ASSOCHAM has said, we can learn. We don't have to make the mistakes that other countries have made. And that we don't have to pollute our way to prosperity. We don't have to deforest our way to prosperity. Now, openness and transparency, I think, is very, very important. And, there are many civil society organizations in Kolkata, for example, when I was minister, came to me and talked to me about the wetlands of Kolkata disappearing. In fact, Kolkata is a giant wetland in itself. And still there are many wetlands that were disappearing in the process of urbanization and urban development. And one of the things that I tried to do, and one of the things that I hope will get done as part of the political process, is to expand the scope of public participation and decision making. Environment is not a technocratic issue. Environment is an issue that affects livelihoods. Environment is an issue that affects people at large. So people must have a stake in the decision-making process. There must be openness. There must be transparency. The trade-offs between economic growth and environmental protection must be made explicit. And if there is conflict, that conflict has to be resolved through a democratic process. Because let us be under no illusions. The process of reconciling economic growth and environment will involve taking tough decisions, will involve necessarily, in some situations, conflict. What you're seeing in POSCO in Odisha is conflict. What you were seeing in Salboni, for many years when the steel plant was coming up, was conflict. What you were seeing in Vedanta, the bauxite mining in Niyamgiri, were conflicts. So how does society deal with conflict? We are a democratic society. We have to deal with it in a democratic way, in an open way, in a transparent way. And in sometimes, economic growth will get the priority. And sometimes, you may end up saying, no, this wetland is very important. I'm going to preserve this wetland and I'm not going to allow construction to happen in this area. But those choices have to be made in an open and transparent manner.
Let me try and be a little provocative. A lot of times, it's a very, very important point that you raised about public participation and public awareness. But a lot of people also seem to think, particularly the so-called economic growth lobby, that environmental activism is very indisciplined. It is basically rabble-rousing. It is social media rants, taking a lot of photographs, catchy headlines, and nothing really comes out of it. Maybe it's an extreme view, but this is a view. And similarly, one could also argue that it's easy to be environmentally conscious and ecologically aware when you're not officially part of the governing process and you're not part of a ministry. Now, I know both of them are provocative, but would certainly like to hear your views, and I wonder whether Mr. Kanoria would like to chime in.
You see, the way I would look at it is that your process of getting feedback in a democratic society should be democratic. Get the views of the people. But ultimate decision, what is good for society, needs to be taken by the government. Because there, what happens is, it's like a family. A child, when he's growing, would not know what is good for him. But yes, a good parent would hear his child, get a sense, and then take a call what is good on the long run for the child. The same way in a society, if you completely open up and leave that, yes, the decision will be taken by the society, that yes, if they don't want a particular thing to happen, a development will never happen. And therefore, that's where the balance is required. Take inputs, take feedback from the local people where the environment is going to get impacted. But post that, taking an overall bigger picture view, take a call.
Well, I think this is a very dangerous proposition. And this is the proposition that India has adopted in the last 40, 50 years. Let's have public hearings. And unfortunately, the reality in India is that where you have public, you have no hearings. And where there is hearings, there is no public. I mean, that's the reality of public hearings. The notion that you listen to people and then a group of wise men in government is going to decide what's good for you, it's a very dangerous proposition. People know what's good for them. In the Chipko movement, the women of Uttarakhand didn't want their forests to be destroyed. The government wanted the forests to be destroyed. But the Chipko women made sure that the forests were protected. Who had superior wisdom? The women of Uttarakhand or the government of India or the government of Uttarakhand at that time? So this notion that we will decide after hearing all of you, that's not a good proposition at all. I think you must listen, and very often, the process of listening will throw up a completely different decision-making matrix than what governments start off with. And I think that openness must come. We cannot say, we are opening to listen to you, but at the end we'll do what we want, because we know what's good for you. Let me give you a very simple example. Take the bauxite mining case in Niyamgiri. There is no question that bauxite needs to be mined. There is no question that India needs more aluminum. We need more aluminum. You know, as we keep drinking more soft drinks, you need those aluminum cans, right? It's a sign of progress. So we need to have aluminum, and, you know, it's a light metal, energy efficient, and so on and so forth. But do you need to mine that bauxite from a hill that is considered sacred to a particular tribe? Does democracy always mean majority rule? Does democracy not mean also listening to the voices of people who are on the margins and actually taking decisions in their favor? Now, these are the choices that get thrown up, and these are the choices that governments will be forced to make. And my contention, which made me very unpopular with my friends, like Asocham and Fiki and so on, is that I was prepared to take decisions which did not, I stress, which did not always go in favor of people wanting quote-unquote economic growth. I was to say that there are situations where society must say protecting a forest, protecting a mountain, protecting our rivers are more important for local communities and local livelihoods than building a highway or building an expressway or building a power plant. Now that's what creates the conflict. That's where the conflict situation comes. And that's what you have to manage.
Yeah. Was that the biggest challenge of your ministry, reconciling these seemingly conflicting interests?
It's complete. See, conflict is essential in this. The notion that this is going to be a peaceful, goody-goody process, let's disabuse ourselves of that notion. There is going to be conflict. There is going to be a lot of dispute. And as he says, you must have an open mind. You must listen to people. At the end of the day, you take a call. Sometimes the call may be in the overall interest, you need to build a dam, which the government did. The government listened to Meda Patkar for 10 years and then said, no, we are going to dam the Narmada and be damned in the process. But that's a separate issue. But there may be situations where governments may listen and say, at the end of the day, no, we don't want to build this dam. This debate is now taking place in Uttarakhand, in the upper reaches of the Ganga. Should you build dams in the upper reaches of the Ganga between Uttarkashi and Gomukh, and in the process make sure that there is no water left in the river? Or should you build these hydel projects in the name of generating more power? This is a question that governments are facing as we speak. And my point is that there may be situations where the government may say, the Ganga is a national river, it's a sacred river, faith is very important. Ultimately, the function of a river is to have water. And in order to fulfill that, we are not going to build these hydel projects. It's possible that that decision may get taken.
So
I think the problem is not in the decision making as such. Whatever policies are laid down, what is important is it laid down from upfront. Where the economic development and the private sector faces the challenges that as you go along the development, you face different situations. Why do we need to, if we have to leave the view from the people at the ground, why approval process has to go to Delhi? Let the center be involved primarily in research to looking at what is good overall for the country, what are the policy frameworks required, put those in place. The implementation should be left at the local authority level, local governments, local bodies at that level. Then basically taking the views of the people there, what is good, what are the sentiments, all that will be taken account. But once a policy and the framework has been put in, a project has been given a clearance and a go-ahead, post that, then when you face a problem, that's where the pinching is there. And that is where the industry, the enterprises, the businesses, they will not even conceive a project if they feel that, yes, a particular thing will not happen. But it is in the process, in the journey, when you start a project. I'll give an example. We have been engaged in many projects, and I have been an environmental assessor of project when we finance in the infra space. So we got our clearances, started the project. Halfway through the project, the rules, environment rules changed. They came back and said, no, now you need to break your project because now my rule has changed. We may have given you an approval earlier based on the guidelines at that point of time, but during a journey, the rule has changed, now you better change your project. You have planned yourself, you have invested a major portion of your money, and then you get stuck. What do you do? Then, therefore, it is very important, yes, if you need that development, do it. But do it in an open, transparent manner. This is my guideline, this is my policy. A lot of focus needs to be done on the right policy framework which has to be created for a congenial environment, because industry also needs a congenial environment. When we talk about the environment for development of the environment of our forest and of our area, you also need a congenial environment for enterprises to grow. Because entrepreneurship, that's how employment will happen. That's how development and growth. You have to take care of our people also. People need food and basic needs to grow when we have such a large population.
So if I understood you correctly, you are essentially saying that the policy making infrastructure should rest at the center and the execution should be with local and state governments of mega projects. Is
right.
that what you're saying?
Absolutely. No approval should go to the center.
So once the policy is set, all approvals happen at the state level. Is this possible to administer or even desirable?
Well, I don't think it's desirable in many instances. I'm all for decentralization. India is a federal framework. There are certain subjects that are allocated to states. There are certain subjects allocated to local governments. There are certain subjects allocated to the central government. We have laws. We have laws for protecting the environment. Incidentally, one factor that very many people, my friends in industry, forget is that there is a specific historical context to every environmental law that we have enacted. Very specific context. The Forest Conservation Act of 1980 came in the background of the Chipko movement. Large-scale deforestation in the Himalayas. The Environment Protection Act of 1986 came in the background of humanity's worst industrial disaster in Bhopal. So every disaster we have had a response in legislative terms. So our laws that we enacted the Forest Rights Act in 2006 because of the perception and the reality that there was large-scale displacement of tribals from forest areas in the process of economic growth. So every act, every law is not passed in a fit of absent-mindedness. Every law has a certain political and historical and a social context. Now the problem is that we, as my friend Gopal Gandhi once told me when I was minister, that our enthusiasm for passing laws is not matched by our exuberance for bypassing them. And in fact, this is a line that I have quoted in the book, and I still remember very vividly what Gopal wrote to me in this matter, that we pass the laws and then we take great delight in bypassing them. And I think that shouldn't happen. We have the laws, we have the rules, we have responsibilities to assign to the federal government, to the central government, to the state government, to the local governments. And to the extent that we bring about decentralization and empowerment at lower levels, I'm all for it. But empowerment at local level should not mean that I can arm twist the local guys easily rather than arm twist the guys sitting in Delhi. Very often, these things need to come to Delhi because people in Delhi are a little far removed from the decision-making process and little less amenable to what I would call non-technical incentives.
We also, have instances where state governments have done something fairly exemplary or, which can be emulated on a larger scale. For instance, Mr. Kejriwal in Delhi has just done an odd-even formula, which attracted a lot of attention, both positive and negative, but at least it was a step. Do you think there could be this kind of exchange of ideas or information or between the two? We always quite often see union governments and state governments or industries are absolutely loggerheads over a large project or an initiative. So is that possible, such exchange of ideas?
Let me give you an example of what will happen if you give more powers to state governments. Every state government wants to open up forest areas for private companies. And it's because Forest Conservation Act is there that this has not happened. If you had allowed state governments power over their forest areas, you take it from me, every state government would have opened up forest areas to private paper mills and to private industry, and whatever little forests we have had, it would have gone. The reason why the forests have remained is because of a Forest Conservation Act that is administered centrally. So sometimes, in this current environment, I know the current political mahal is to bash Delhi and to say the states are great and give all powers to the states. Actually, we are a multi-tier democratic system, and I think we should not tamper with the flow. We should empower each level of government. I'm all for it, but we should also recognize that there are certain issues which require national responses. In the case of the Ganga, all political parties in Uttarakhand are united in ensuring that there is no water in the Ganga. My own political party, the Congress party, the BJP, every political party wants to build dam after dam after dam because building more dams means more contracts. And more contracts, you know what it means. So nobody is interested. It is the central government which intervened and made sure that there was some regulation on building these dams on the Ganga. So if you had given all the powers to the state governments, I'm sure those of you who visit the upper reaches of the Ganga, you will see only hydroelectric dams and you will not see any water. I think odd even type of experiments are very good. I think there's room for a lot of innovation. But ultimately, it's the enforcement of the laws that matter. And if the state governments are keen on environmental issues, they must demonstrate that keenness by enforcing the laws. The laws are there. The standards are there. Whether it's for pollution, for air pollution or water pollution, you have to enforce them. And I think this is where the shoe begins to pinch. When you start enforcing them, there's a lot of backlash. And in that backlash, you don't want to create too many enemies. And therefore, you end up compromising.
Mr. Kanoria, you're in an interesting position here.
Yeah.
Because you are a champion of private sector, and yet you're the president of a national body, and yet based in a state. So what would be your point of view on this?
You see, exactly what I'm saying is that I'm not at all saying that rules, regulation, and the laws need not be prepared at the center level for what is overall, take the inputs and prepare those rules and regulations. The implementation of that. They cannot violate if there is a rule of afforestation, deforestation not allowed, etc. A state cannot violate it because the regulations have been laid down. The challenge basically happens that in India we do not have that foresight and like long-term planning. Say for example, you talked about the odd and even solution which the Delhi government has come. Why have we come across this situation today? Had we planned a good public transport system, a good roads, where people can walk, people can cycle, people can have easy access through public transport, you would not face these problems. So where the issue is that where a lot of work and effort is required, a long-term horizon planning, that yes, this is what India would need. What should be the way forward? How do we develop those ecosystems? If you develop those ecosystems, which takes care of the environment, along with development also is what is required. And therefore, the balance and the working together, the debate is not one against the other. The debate should be that how both can work together in parallel to ensure that we do not create problems for our people. They also develop and they grow. They have a right to live. But also parallelly, we create those ecosystem required for effective development.
Okay. Let's just turn our attention to today, as of now. After which we will open it up for questions, because I can see there are questions. So post Paris, climate is on everybody's minds. Suddenly it's the most important topic. We are talking about survival of our forests, survival of our children, better air quality, water. And anyone who has spent a Delhi winter knows what air quality stuff that I'm talking about. So with this backdrop, also, just going back to your time, you had made some efforts, your ministry, to reposition India in some of very critical environmental issues. So if I may say that we are one of the largest democracies of the world. Everybody knows India's demographics, and I personally think despite all our problems, it is India's time. So we are a very, very different entity than what we used to be in 1991. So what is India's role in this current climate? How much importance does the environment has, rightly? And how can we get better at it?
Well, India's position traditionally has been that we have not caused the problem of global warming, so don't bother us. Let's keep growing for the next 25 years. You guys clean up, because you guys are the ones that have put all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This has been the traditional Indian position. And this traditional Indian position has been based on a very simple calculation, a very simple proposition of per capita emissions. You see, in India, everything per capita is very low because the denominator is so big. When Indra Nooyi comes to India from America as chairman of Pepsi, she says India is the biggest market for soft drinks. Why? Because the per capita consumption is very small. So anything per capita in India, where per capita is 1.25 billion, increasing by 10 million or 11 million every year, is bound to be small. So per capita emissions is very small. So we're very small per capita emissions, so don't bother us. You guys clean up. So this has been the traditional Indian position. But that's changed. It's changed in the last couple of years. And it's changed because I think the public health consequences of pollution are becoming very apparent, both water pollution and air pollution. It has also changed because the international gaze on India has increased. India today contributes only about 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But by 2030, we will be in the second position. We would be contributing almost 15%. We would be where America is today. So the international gaze is also increasing on India. And we may be fighting the Americans, but as far as Bangladesh and Maldives and Africa is concerned, we are as much the villains as the Americans and the Europeans. It's very interesting that, Bangladesh and Maldives and all these small, Nepal, Bhutan, all these small countries are not bothered with who is contributed to the CO2. They are saying India and China are also contributing as much as America and Europe, so you do something about it. So India's position has evolved, and I think in Paris, the important thing in Paris was that every country decided to take on responsibility for doing something meaningful in the next 15 to 20 years to reduce its emissions of carbon dioxide. It's very important. And I think in the next 15, 20 years, you will see a major commitment to renewable energy, particularly solar energy, major commitment to energy efficiency, a major commitment to ensuring that in whatever we do, the emissions are kept at manageable levels. So to that extent, I think the debate in Paris has been very constructive. India is now positioned differently than what it was 10 years ago. And I think climate change for us is a huge opportunity, because the impact of climate change, we may not be part of the problem, but the impact of climate change is the maximum on India. That's, I think, the reality that we have to come to grips with.
As, again, a champion of industry and economic growth, how would you respond to this? I mean, and interestingly, you also have a domestic and a global footprint. That all makes you a global company, right? So what do you think India should be doing?
Now, I think very clearly we are seeing that, as Mr. Ramesh said, that last few years, India has recognized the value, and I totally agree that India cannot be compared. Everything, you cannot look at it on a per capita income. India is in terms of its advantage of its population, or advantage or disadvantage, whatever. But the point basically what can happen is the learnings which we can do, as I said in my beginning also, is that if we can capture the learnings of the world in our development phase during next 10, 20 few decades where India will grow, and ensure that what development we do it in a balanced way. And that is what is important. A balanced, transparent way is the way to move forward.
Any closing comments before we open it up to the audience?
No, I think all I want to say is that, we have a long tradition in this country of civil society activism. And environment is an issue in which civil society activism has played a very important role. The Chipko movement, which I keep referring to, contemporary India's first major environmental campaign, was a campaign launched by the women of Uttarakhand. Silent Valley. Very few people remember Silent Valley, but in 1980, it was the civil society of Kerala which ensured that the rainforests of Silent Valley were protected. So whether it's the wetlands of Kolkata, or protecting the forest areas of Jharkhand and Odisha and Chhattisgarh, or protecting the Ganga in Uttarakhand, society is ahead of government. This is very important. Governments should not always think that we have all superior wisdom. Society is ahead because people's livelihoods are involved. And people's livelihoods in our country still depend on natural resources. It still depends on forests. It still depends on access to water. So when you are seeing agitations and protests, my request is, particularly to my friends in industry, don't look at these protests as signs of people not wanting development. These are protests by people wanting to protect their livelihoods. And governments must be sensitive to these issues. Whether it's water, whether it's land, whether it's forests, whether it's mountains, people's livelihoods are involved. And I think we should be cautious to ensure that the economic growth that we are all aspiring for does not come at a huge ecological cost. I mean, that's the fear I have, that, a single-minded, blind pursuit of economic growth, which I subscribed to 25 years ago, and which I no longer subscribe to as I have become older, is something that we need to really temper, because of the fact that, our challenges are different than the challenges that other countries have faced.
We don't have a lot of time, but definitely a few questions. So,
hello. Okay. Good evening, sir. I have two questions. One on a national level and one on a more industry level, so you can answer as you see fit. On the national level, something which you have mentioned several times in the course of just this discussion, I haven't read the book yet, so I don't know, is population. Now, India has a massive population and it's going to keep growing. And India is not a big country in terms of sheer land. I mean, it's a big country, but in terms of the population we have, it's like, I mean, Texas could fit the Indian population about 20 times over, and Texas has like a very small population. So it's like that. How important do you think it, and this is controversial, but how important do you think it is for the government to put a very strict imposition on the rate at which the population is increasing? And this is, I personally sometimes think that, you know, the way China was very strict about restricting population, of course it was inhuman to a great extent, but sometimes it feels like that's important, that's necessary, because it is very important to save the environment. But if you have so many people and they need to be housed and they need to be employed and they need to be fed, then, well, I mean, we are talking, then we have to become this extremely utopian society where no one cares about profit and everything is just, you know, come into my house, I will feed you, because we're all human beings. So how important is it for the government to say that it's good that we're growing, but we need to maybe control that growth in some aspects? And the other question is, so I'm a fashion design student, right? And our industry basically runs on, well, we like earning our money. And the thing is that when there are designers, fashion is generally a luxury, it's a concept. Now, when there are designers who try to do this in a more sustainable way, in a more environmentally conscious way, which also includes things like fair trade and environmental practices, what happens is, because our production cost increases, so these become marketed as luxury goods. So for industries to turn their perspective towards being more environmentally sustainable automatically makes them accessible, the products accessible only to a certain income group. So how is it possible for the common man to be environmentally conscious in terms of the products they purchase, which is what you meant about Bangladesh? So Bangladesh is very commonly known as this huge outsourcing. It's a place where a lot of people go, a lot of big companies go to produce their textiles and garments and things like that. And that's not sustainable, because everyone's buying them. You walk into like a Pantaloons or a West Side and you buy these things which have been produced in sweatshops. The moment you try to make it sustainable, sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, great question. But before Mr. Ramesh answers, please keep your questions brief.
Sorry.
We don't have time, so just keep it brief.
Well, my answer will be briefer. Let's take the population question. It's not population per se that is going to destroy the environment. It's going to be consumption. In China, the population was stable from 1990 to 2000. But consumption went up sixfold. And that's why China is the world's biggest polluter today. So in spite of a stable population, China has become a huge polluter because the consumption patterns of China changed. So I would not automatically say, just because population is increasing, we are going to face an apocalypse as far as the environment is concerned. It is the consumption. Whether consumption and your lifestyles are sustainable, are your consumption standards sustainable, and how much, again, to quote Gopal Gandhi, a famous saying that is associated with Mahatma Gandhi is, some of the most famous sayings of Mahatma Gandhi, Gopal once told me, the Mahatma actually never said. But these are sayings that we hope that the Mahatma said because they're so good. And one of the things of the Mahatma that has become a slogan internationally is that there is enough in the world for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. It's a beautiful saying. The only thing is he never said it. But but we hope. I mean, we would like to think that he said it. So it's the consumption standard. It's the nature of consumption. It's the nature of electricity that we use. It's the nature of the cars that we use. It's the nature of urbanization that we promote. That is what leads to pressure on our natural resources. It's not population alone. But the fact is, the reality is in India that we are going to be 1.7 billion, whatever you do. I mean, even if by some miracle we all become one child family, we are still going to be 1.7 billion by the year 2050 because of the sheer bulge, the demographic bulge that we've had in the last 50, 60 years. So I'm afraid we have to start planning for a country of 1.7 billion. The roads that we build, the highways that we build, the power plants that we build, the jobs that we generate are going to be for 1.7 billion. That's a reality that we have to confront.
I think we had a question there. Yeah. This gentleman.
Actually, a couple of quick questions, brief question. First is that, Jairam, you said that
Couple of quick questions. That's a contradiction in terms. One question.
Okay, you said that you really still do not believe the economic model you were sucked into about 25 years back. Is it your personal opinion also, or you think that it's also part of the Congress' new kind of political strategy?
No. Let me hasten to say that I am not speaking here as a spokesman of a political party. I'm not speaking on behalf of a political party. I'm not making a political statement. It's a personal belief. And it's a personal belief that is not widely shared. I might even say that. It's many people, many of my own colleagues believe that I am an activist. But I've had a lot of problem convincing my colleagues that we need to think differently on the nature of economic growth that we are promoting. And there are many issues on which I've had to take a minority position. Genetically modified crops. It's a big issue. It's an environmental issue that India is going to confront in the next 15 to 20 years. On genetically modified crops, I had a certain position, which went against the position of my own government, by the way. So, it's my private belief. It's my belief, and I feel that we need to. And why do I say it's a private belief? Because 25 years ago, I wouldn't have said what I'm saying today. 25 years ago, I would have said, close your eyes. Forget about everything. Just grow at 10% for the next 25 years. And let's worry about things later. Today I feel that I would not be being honest to myself and to my country and to the people if I were to advocate this. And I feel that we need to make a slight change in that position.
Any other question? Gentleman at the back. Can you get him a mic, please?
Doesn't have a mic.
Good evening, Ramesh. This is Umesh. Here, this side.
Okay, you have a mic.
Can you see me?
Yeah, I can see.
Thank you very much for seeing me. Thank God we don't have a robust purchase power, or else our Indian boys and girls in schools. Basically, I'm a teacher, to be very specific. I'm a principal. Americans, I read somewhere, have taken to obesity because of what they call soft drinks. Thank God we are not able to buy so much cold drinks for children. Otherwise, God knows what would have happened to this poor country. My point is, you have been in government, though it's not a political question, by the way. You have been in government, and as you say, you are not today any statesman of a political party. Now, I'm not taking you as one. Supposing mining of bauxite for aluminum, for packing those canes is illegal, and you only said society is ahead of a government. Society is ahead of taxes as well, I guess. Society ahead of all other things. So if in 2019 you strikes back, again I'm not being political, if in there might be possibility if in 2019 you strike back, can we hope that taking aside these taxes and other things which Indira Nui came down back to India, we, our government, as an activist, you could do something for my boys and girls down there in my school who don't buy so many cold drinks cans, and as America's economy was paralyzed only by the obese teens, obese youth. So I don't want my youth to be responsible for slow economic growth of this poor country.
Well, I get your question. I get your question. I think India. I think we should have punitive taxes on soft drinks. I don't think you should ban soft drinks. I don't think that we are a Stalinist government. We are a democratic government. People should be entitled to have soft drinks. I occasionally also have a soft drink, but you should make it prohibitively. You should put a tax. You should put a luxury tax on a soft drink. You should put I have been arguing for the last 10 years. I've been singularly unsuccessful we must put a luxury tax on a diesel car, because the diesel car is the most polluting car in an urban area. And part of the problem of the odd even in Delhi came because of the explosion in diesel cars, because diesel is cheaper than petrol. So I have been arguing, and again nobody listens, because economic growth is more important, because producing more diesel cars is a sign that our GDP is increasing. And if you produce less diesel cars, your index of industrial production goes down, and all the pink papers will become black with black margins. So the answer, my friend, is in all these areas, government to use the powers of taxation to say that, look, soft drinks are not good for your health, so I'm going to have a tax. This is what we do for cigarettes, but people still smoke. This is what we do for alcohol, but people still drink. But it's a personal choice. But governments are trying to force a certain pattern of behavior by the taxes that they impose.
Mr. Kanoria, would you like to add a comment to this?
No, basically, you see, the issue is not of a diesel car or anything. If you have a policy and a framework in place, taxes, yes, can be there in order to discourage certain development which could be overall negative for the society. But basically what is again required is that if there is a long-term planning and what is overall beneficial, where development, economic development and environmental both have to go together. And that is very critical in any aspect. You do that, you'll solve a lot of the problems.
I'd like to ask a question.
Okay, one, and then somebody get the gentleman at the back. He's been Mike.
See, all these years we are not seeing, the common people were not seeing the impact on environment. But today it is very clear. 2015 is found to be the hottest year in a very, very long time. Winter is not coming in time. Rains are not falling. We have Sundarban flood problem. Then why the actions are not more swift? Why it is taking so much time for people to realize that what is going to happen in next 5 or 10 years?
I think it's a very important question. Why, if society is ahead of government, why, if impacts are already being felt by people, why isn't government, why isn't decision making being proactive and responsive? It's a very important question that you have raised. And my answer to this is that the victims of environmental degradation in India are not as influential as the purveyors of environmental degradation. The guys who cause environmental degradation, in which I include governments, by the way. Government is not blameless. Government companies are as polluting, if not more, than the private sector. I mean, in this, there are no good guys and bad guys. Everybody is in the same boat. The voices of the people who are the victims of environmental degradation are simply not heard, because they are too numerous, too scattered, and there is no critical mass. Who has heard, for example, the voices of the hundreds of millions of people living in the Indo-Gangetic belt, including in West Bengal for that matter, who are suffering from arsenic contamination? Who has heard of this? Arsenic, as you know, is a long-term carcinogen. And the biggest source of arsenic contamination in the Indo-Gangetic belt is drinking water, the hand pumps, the shallow hand pumps. But we have done nothing about it. We're not bothered about it. Because it's a question of who has got the maximum voice, who's got the maximum power, who's got the maximum clout. And I'm afraid the people who do not have, unless there is a catastrophe, unless a Bhopal happens, unless there is a huge disaster that hits, then governments become very responsive. This is, yesterday Professor Sen, I think, was speaking here, Amartya Sen, and this is the Amartya Sen thesis, which is applicable. Amartya Sen has this thesis that in democracies, catastrophes are avoided, but slow death is not avoided. Because democracies, have civil society, have the free press, have political parties, and they make sure that big disasters don't happen. But incremental disasters, slow-moving, under the radar disasters continue to happen in democracies. This is what his thesis has been when he compared India and China. And this is absolutely true in the environmental field as well.
We have time for just one last question. Yeah.
My regards to both the panelists and the moderator. I have a brief question. Is there a lacking on the part of the government in framing the correct policies as far as their priorities for the development or growth is concerned? Because we need energy, certainly, with ever-growing need of energy. But as you many times referred to the the hydroelectric power projects that are spelling dooms, that has been amply demonstrated by many of the reports that has come till date. So if there was a policy in terms of generating energy but not straying less stress on the hydel projects and going to other green non-renewable energy projects or renewable energy products, that is purely a part of the well-intentioned political program or the political or governmental agenda. And secondly, in this discourse of environment and economic growth, will there be ever a conclusion in favor of the large majority of this country when the economic growth is basically driven in today's context entirely by the logic of profit, where the public sector intervention or the governmental intervention or the growth which is designed in terms of the large majority is considered blasphemous, is considered not worthy or outdated? Thank you.
We would ask Mr. Kanoria to go first on this, and then Mr. Ramesh.
You see, basically, if you look at profit in the country since independence too, has been made as a dirty word. If we have to take care of the population, if you see that we'll grow to 1.7 billion, we have to create wealth in society. Yes, you have to have equality, you have to have a growth which is inclusive, no doubt about it. Otherwise, it will further create more challenges. But basically, as I said earlier also, the balance between economic development and environment is required, and it's a journey. As you move along in life, as you move forward, the way it would change is your priorities, your taking care of your existing people and the future generations who are to come. And that is where the importance of government, a good government, to be able to have a foresight and that vision to lay down. We have countries in the world where we can learn from also, where government brought in those practices, principles, policies, rules and regulations which help a far better development. Therefore, I think India needs to create our own format, own model of development which will be inclusive and which would also take care of the environment.
Mr. Ramesh?
Well, I think government's policies are fairly clear. That we need faster growth, we need jobs. We have 8 million, 9 million youngsters coming into the labor force every year. They need productive employment opportunities, and employment comes from investment. Investment comes now from the private sector, and I think government's policies are fairly clear, and I think that's in the right direction. You need to create an environment for investment that will generate jobs, that will drive the process of economic growth. So let there be no quibbling or questioning on that. The problem really is that in this process, there are certain speed breakers. This is not a growth turnpike. This is not a growth highway without speed breakers. There are some speed breakers. And those speed breakers sometimes are, caused by political factors. Some speed breakers are environmental speed breakers. And you can negotiate those speed breakers. how do you negotiate it? And that's what this discussion has been about. You negotiate it democratically, you negotiate it through a process of open and transparent dialogue without preconceived notion as to what the conclusion is. And therefore, the key challenge for us as citizens, as political parties, as industrialists, is how do you manage this conflict? There is no debate that environment and economic growth have to go hand in hand. I think everybody recognizes that. The real issue is that in the process of going hand in hand, if there are certain contradictions, if there are certain challenges, if there are certain conflicts, how are they going to be managed? That's the issue. And I think that is an open debate. This will continue. There is no formula. There is no standard pre-cooked recipe that is available in any book. It's something that we will learn as we evolve. We will make mistakes. I mean, let's be also very clear. We are not a China. We are not a Singapore. That, we can just close our eyes and do whatever a great man or a wise man decides what is wise for the rest of the country. We can't do that. The nature of our society is different. So in all our imperfections, with all our, diversities, we have to create a path for ourselves, a political path for ourselves, in order to manage the conflicts that are inherent between economic growth and environmental protection.
We have to close now. A big thank you to our panelists and the organizers of Kolkata Lit Meet, and being a very patient audience on a very cold evening. Thank you. And Mr. Ramesh will be around to sign copies of his book if any of you are interested. Thank you again.